Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to offer dana, then please do go to justthiszen.org/giving. Your support really does make a huge difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you everybody for being here, and yes, feeling a little speechless after my breakout room, so just taking a moment with that. And we were just sharing connection and joy and loss. So in those brief minutes, we seemed to touch all of life. So that was a very beautiful thing. One of the things that's really interesting for me about this day that we call Rohatsu, the celebration of Buddha's awakening, he kind of sat down under the Bodhi tree with this real determination to see what's suffering, what's the causes of suffering, and what are the ways out of suffering. And in a way, he found the Eightfold Path, which we've been sharing through those prompts, which are invitations for how to live life with more freedom. And I think so many of these things, especially if we manage to shove them through a kind of Western Judeo-Christian lens, we can kind of really turn into shoulds and oughts, and rather than invitations. And they settle in my being much more easily when they feel like invitations. And after Buddha had sat and had this sort of rather this awakening to the causes of suffering and the relief of suffering, as we say in the Jukai ceremony when we're taking the precepts, even after great enlightenment, will you continue this practice? And you have to say it 3 times. Really? Even after great enlightenment? Really, 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 even after great enlightenment? And you say yes. And so the Buddha sat under the tree and then found out that the rest of his long and difficult life he was going to have to try and convey to people what he'd found, so that they too, we too, could find this path towards sort of freedom. And his teaching at the beginning and his teaching in the middle and his teaching at the end was the same. But in trying to express the ineffable, the inexpressible, trying to find ways to point to the moon, to go through the gateless gate, all of these ways basically come down to some really simple things, which we seem to really struggle to live with. And one of the sort of key things of the Eightfold Path were the 4 practice principles. The 4 Noble Truths, and we express them like this, caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering. Holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher. Being just this moment, compassion's way. And for those of us who have a sitting practice, we'll say these every time we meet. We're going to say them. And so I was kind of really curious with myself as to how I might find a way, after 2,000 years of other people finding a way, to express these particular truths. And I came upon a really, to me, really wonderful article called The Invitation by an author, Barry Lopez. And Barry Lopez has spent an enormous amount of time with Indigenous people. And his experience has taught him a great deal. And as I was reading the article, I could feel it mapping for me, mapping onto the 4 practice principles. So I'd like to sort of interleave his article with some of my reflections. So I'm not actually going to be referring to the Buddha's texts. because for me it's life as it is, this life, my life, what I'm reading, what I'm doing, what I experience on the cushion and off the cushion. So Barry Lopez says, when I was young and just beginning to travel with them, the indigenous people he was traveling with, I imagined the indigenous people saw more and heard more, that they were overall simply more aware than I was. They were more aware and did see and hear more than I did. The absence of spoken conversation whenever I was travelling with them, however, should have provided me with a clue about why this might be true, but it didn't, not for quite a while. It's this. When an observer doesn't immediately turn what his senses convey to him into language, into the vocabulary and syntactical framework we all employ when we try to define our experiences, there's a much greater opportunity for minor details, which might at first seem unimportant, to remain alive in the foreground of an impression, where later they might deepen the meaning of an experience. That this silent moving through the land of his companions, where he could begin to see that they didn't rush to concretize their experience, but instead open to the whole space around it. And that's really the basic instruction. It's probably not the right word, but that's the opportunity that we're being invited into every time we sit. Can we notice and not rush to conclusion? Can we notice and not make it into our familiar narrative? And in our sitting, this invitation is to pay soft attention to the way that our self-orientated narrative defines the space we're in and the way we experience that. And we so often don't see what is always and already there in this act of sitting, our way-seeking mind, our Buddha nature. Can we sit with for no purpose except to open our awareness and bring ourselves right up against the very edges of our self-centered dream? I'm sure many of you have had the experience of sitting and noticing the same narrative. My back hurts, my knee hurts, what have I got to do? Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, I should have said that. It's like you've probably noticed the very similar refrains that we have. Ron Kurtz once said that we have 6,000 thoughts a day. 5,000 are the ones we had yesterday. I think we're quite lucky if we have 1,000 new ones myself. But anyway, so Barry Lopez continues. If my companions and I, for example, encountered a grizzly bear feeding on a caribou carcass, I admit not one of our usual experiences, I would tend to focus almost exclusively on the bear. My companions would focus on the part of the world which at that moment the bear was only a fragment. The bear here might be compared to a bonfire, a kind of incandescence that throws light on everything round it. My companions would glance off into the outer reaches of the light, then look back to the fire, back and forth. They would repeatedly situate the smaller thing within the larger thing, back and forth. How often do we do that? How often are we situating the smaller thing of our experience into the larger thing of the experience of the whole world? So they notice trace odors in the air, or listen for birdsong, or the sound of brittle brush rattling. They in effect extended the moment of encounter with the bear backward and forward in time. So they're constantly situating themselves in a flow. As we are living in a flow. But we're often situating ourselves in just a static moment rather than the flow of a moment. He says, their framework for the phenomenon, one that I might later shorten to just meeting the bear, just met the bear, was far more voluminous than mine. And where my temporal boundaries for the event normally consist of little more than moments of the encounter itself, theirs included the time before we arrived, as well as the time after we left. For me, the bear was a noun, the subject of a sentence. For them, it was a verb, the gerund bearing. So many of us live life as a noun, as a series of events, rather than a verb, life, living, unfolding. As I was reading this, I don't know if you have the same feeling, but it felt for me such a wonderful analogy of caught in the self-centered dream. So often we're focused on bear, ourselves, or at most bear and carcass, bear ourselves and the immediate world. We're focused on our own internal geography and experience. We see any event as being about us. We center our experience on the very limited amount of information we have. And sadly, because of our nervous system heritage, we usually look for information that confirms our often non-conscious belief systems and conditioning. Our habit energy is usually our main driver. So for me, the 4 practice principles are an invitation to move into this much wider view of each moment, how each moment is inextricably connected to all the moments before and all the moments after. Like Josh describing, moving through the dark without really knowing where we're going, but we know we're moving forward and we know we've moved away from something. Can we carry that experience with us rather than just waiting until we get to somewhere we know? So all these elements that we know and see and the things that we don't know and can't see. But maybe if we're really still and don't over-focus on bear, we can open out of the self-centered dream. We can situate our experience not as a noun, but as a verb, our living, our being alive. And that's what the Buddha is teaching in every single one of his teachings. If we get caught in the smallest experience of self, we will inevitably suffer. And we'll suffer in a way that magnifies the suffering that's already pretty inevitable. So it's not just the constant shifting of impermanence and the unsatisfactory nature of much of our experience. It's me, mine, our, it's this. I'm centering it on this, my experience. The world revolves around my minus. Just like them, if we're just seeing bear, we miss all the rest of the world that's going by. When the Buddha woke up to life as he saw it, he saw the steps which lead us downward into the suffering and the path out of suffering, and how to live out our lives as a way to open up to this much wider truth of life. The second noble truth is holding on to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. And it's about our attachment to the dream. It's about how attached we are to our narrative. Barry Lopez goes on to say, over the years traveling cross-country with Indigenous people, I absorbed 2 lessons about how to be more fully present in an encounter with a wild animal. And I kept in my mind substituting encounter with life. And our sitting practice is the kind of lessons we might need to learn to be fully present to our own lives. Life as the wild and unpredictable animal. He says, first I needed to understand that I was entering the event as it was unfolding. As it was unfolding. It started before I arrived and would continue unfolding after I departed. Second, the event itself, let's say we didn't disturb the grizzly bear as he fed, but only took in what he or she was doing and then slipped away. could not be completely defined by referring solely to the physical geography around us in those minutes. Whatever's happening to us now will continue flowing outwards. We're much more like rippling pools than we are like a single static stone dropped into the middle. All the ripples of all the different lives. I've been sitting here thinking about all the places that we're sitting in right now, and the ripples that'll flow out of this, all the intersections of all the different moments in life. We get so attached to our certainty, to gathering about us the things that support our narrative, our worldview, and that's the holding on to the dream. When I was little, my parents we went on a holiday to Wales, and we brought back a small little, it was kind of made out of clay, and it was a little figurine of a Welsh woman in traditional dress. And she had that kind of pointy hat on, but she had a little cloth pinny round her. And this pinny, to my young mind, she was a weather predicting woman. And the pinny would change colour depending on the weather. And I was deeply enamoured of this. I didn't notice that how often she got it wrong. Or the fact that after a while she stopped predicting anything at all. But in my mind, I kind of internalized a prediction penny as a way of imagining how things were going to go, a certain kind of certainty. I bet they're going to do this. I bet they're going to do that. And I had this really active, predictive part of me. And it served me really well in some ways, because I was fairly good at noticing what was happening, and I was relatively good at predicting. However, over time, what I noticed was that my predictions were really likely to fall into a really narrow category. I remember once sitting in supervision and saying, I can see a storm cloud from 100 miles away. And that's because that was what I was geared up to look for. I was geared up to look for danger and difficulty and conflict. And so I saw it, and I would see it pretty often. And it wasn't always inaccurate, but it was always partial. And there's something for me about really noticing how that I was creating, responding to, and creating because of the strength of that narrative, the way of staying in that very self, caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering, holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. From that, we come to the way that we might start to disentangle ourselves from this very self-centered dream. And the invitation is, each moment, life as it is, the only teacher. Life as it is, not life as we want it to be, not life as it should be, not life as it could be, but life as it is, the only teacher. And the invitation here is to experience life not as a series of dots that we keep joining up, which are usually linear and fed by our habit energy. My prediction penny meant that I could join up dots to look for difficulty, storms, conflict. What happens if I actually stop joining the dots up like that? What happens if I stop trying to constantly create my own narrative? So this is quite a long section from his article, but I just felt he says it so beautifully. He says, for example, I might not recall something that we'd all seen half an hour before, a caribou hoof printed in the soft ground at the edge of a creek, say, but my companions would remember that, and a while after our encounter with the bear, say half a mile further on, they would notice something else, a few grizzly bear guard hairs further on, snagged in the scales of tree bark, or they would relate it to some detail they'd observed during those moments when we were watching the bear. The event I was busily concretizing and cataloguing in my mind as encounter with a tundra grizzly, they were experiencing as a sudden immersion in the current of a river. They were swimming in it, feeling its pull, noting the temperature of the water, the back eddies, and where the side stream enters. My approach, in contrast, was merely to take note of the objects in the scene: bear, caribou, vegetation, a series of dots that I would try to make sense of by connecting them all with a single line. My friends had situated themselves within a dynamic event. Also, unlike me, they felt no immediate need to resolve it into meaning. Their approach was to let it continue to unfold, to notice everything, and to let whatever significance there was to emerge in its own time. Stumbling in the dark, our hands along the wall of our practice, just not having to rush to certainty. And so often, of course, we are living our lives like this, a series of dots that we're rushing to ascribe meaning to, and a meaning that fits our somewhat narrow, limited series of possibilities. Bear, vegetation, forest. How much are we missing? So this for me is such a good example of what it might mean and be like to enter deeply, fully the stream of life. We say that line, don't we? Entering deeply the merciful ocean of Buddha's way. Entering deeply the merciful ocean of Buddha's way. So here's a description of staying in the flow, being aware of the endless and unfolding fluidity of life, just as it is. He says, on occasion I would become so wedded to my thoughts, to some cascade of ideas. Do you know that? A cascade of ideas. That I actually lost touch with the details that my body was still gathering from that place. The ear heard the song of a sparrow and then heard the song again and knew that the second time it was a different sparrow singing. But my mind, being so pleased with itself for identifying those notes as a sparrow, was far too preoccupied to notice what my ear was still offering. What the world is still offering while we're busy honing down on the little details that are in our lives. The mind was making no use of my body's ability to be discerning. And so the mind's knowledge of that place remains superficial. How often is that like that for us? That this intimacy that we could have with this broad flow of life that Buddha describes on his awakening, the intimacy of being completely connected to the broad flow of life, being close to the ongoing unfolding of life. And then so many of us will know, won't we, when something happens, we know that cascade of ideas, and we immediately move into a relationship with our minds rather than staying intimate with what's actually unfolding in and around us. Life, the only teacher, keeps so generously offering moment after moment, not holding back at all, but allowing us to enter because we're not separate. And I was just sharing with Sophie and Joe, we've got our Christmas tree up. It's earlier than usual. And as I was sitting today, I knew that the tree came from Scotland. And I was imagining or feeling or sensing the trees talking to me about being in Scotland, in the wind and the birds and how the air would move there and the light. And I'd just been in Scotland last year, and I had this real sense of like, the tree is here now, but it's still in Scotland, and I'm here now, and I'm still in Scotland. And Scotland is still there. And the wind and the birds and the trees are still moving there. life as it is, exactly as it is, the only teacher. And Buddha's teachings have always been about embracing impermanence, and we know from our own difficulty with impermanence. Dan Siegel talks about the tragedy of our human nervous system is to seek permanence. That's what we're going to do. And it takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of Sangha friends, and it takes a lot of repeatedly putting ourselves in the way of almost going upstream against our natural inclinations to codify, to concretize, to coalesce around our personal narratives. I mean, that's why it's called practice, because we keep having to practice. We keep having to put ourselves here. Barry Lopez says, if the first lesson in learning how to see more deeply into a landscape was to be continuously attentive and to stifle the urge to stand outside the event, to instead stay within the event, leaving its significance to be resolved later. The second lesson for me was to notice how often I ask my body to defer to the dictates of my mind, how my body's extraordinary ability to discern textures and perfumes, to discriminate among tones and colours in the world outside itself, was dismissed by my rational mind. When we're sitting, can we find moments of stopping, deferring to our rational mind, and allow ourselves to be this amazing breathing body in the world of which we are inevitably and inexorably a part? Learning and practicing not to yield to the dismissal of the actual experience is the fourth principle. Being just this moment, compassion's way. Being just this moment, compassion's way. Life as it is the only teacher. He says, a continually refreshed sense of the unplumbable complexity of patterns in the natural world. The unplumbable complexity of the patterns in our world that are ever present and which incorporate the observer, undermine the feeling that one is alone in the world or meaningless in it. The effort to know a place deeply is ultimately an expression of the human desire to belong, to fit somewhere. This sitting practice, this desire to know ourselves deeply, intimately, is part of this path of letting go of self-orientation, just letting go of holding to the self-centered dream. The sense of being necessary in the world, like I find myself becoming of an inexpressible value, as Josh said in Mary Oliver's poem. I'm just here, and my being here is the inexpressible value. We are not separate from life, we're an essential expression of life. And when we can be this moment, the immense compassion that arises of life offering itself over and over again, even as we feel that in our particularity, but not our separateness. We are here as particular beings having particular experiences, but we aren't separate. We are just this moment. I will put a link on the link tree to the article because some of you might like to read it again. He says, a grizzly bear stripping fruit from blackberry vines in a thicket is more than a bear stripping fruit from blackberry vines in a thicket. It is a point of entry into a world most of us have turned our backs on in an effort to go somewhere else. believing we'll be better off. Just thinking, we think we'll be better off thinking about a grizzly bear snipping fruit from blackberry vines in a thicket. This moment, every moment, is an invitation. And the bear's invitation is to participate, and it's offered without prejudice to anyone passing by. I love that idea that life is offered as an invitation without prejudice. And it's a point of entry. Our sitting is a point of entry to the geography of our own lives. Not trying to think our way out of where we are, but sitting more and more deeply into the vast, unknowable, amazing complexity of our own lives, which of course includes the mundane and the ordinary, and the difficult and the painful and the wondrous, whatever it is. And I'm wondering if you could feel, if we, all of us could feel how that might be now, to clearly be an integral part of the place you're sitting in. To know that the room you're sitting in welcomes you, knows you. It's not just you know the room, but by sitting in the room knows you. Life knows you by you being there. And that's what we mean by compassion's way. Life offered in its entirety, offered entirely to everyone without prejudice, to open to everything that is present, which of course includes us. We're not an audience watching a play of life. We are bear and thicket and blackberry and traveller. That's what the Buddha woke up to, and that's what he wanted to share with us. And that's what for 2,000 years named and unnamed people have been sharing with us, that there is a way out of the continual suffering of life into freedom, freedom to just be living the life you have in this very moment. So I'm going to stop there in the middle of my life and I'm going to switch my video off and I'm going to go upstairs and re-put back on the video of the altar, and then when we've done that, Mary, could you say the Song of Zazen? Thank you.
The Sutra on the Heart of Realizing Wisdom Beyond Wisdom. Avalokiteshvara, who helps all to awaken, moves in the deep course of realizing wisdom beyond wisdom, sees that all 5 streams of body, heart and mind are without boundary, and frees all from anguish. O Shariputra, who listens to the teachings of the Buddha, form is not separate from boundlessness. Boundlessness is not separate from form. Form is boundlessness. Boundlessness is form. Feelings, perceptions, inclinations and discernment are also like this. O Shariputra, boundlessness is the nature of all things. It neither arises nor perishes, neither stains nor purifies, neither increases nor decreases. Boundlessness is not limited by form, nor by feelings, perceptions, inclinations or discernment. It is free of the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body and mind, free of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch and any object of mind, free of sensory realms including the realm of the mind. It is free of ignorance and the end of ignorance. Boundlessness is free of old age and death, and free of the end of old age and death. It is free of suffering, arising, cessation and path, and free of wisdom and attainment. Being free from attainment, those who help all to awaken abide in the realization of wisdom beyond wisdom, and live with an unhindered mind. Without hindrance, the mind has no fear. Free from confusion, those who lead all to liberation embody profound serenity. All those in the past, present and future who realize wisdom beyond wisdom manifest unsurpassable and thorough awakening. Know that realizing wisdom beyond wisdom is no other than this wondrous mantra, luminous, unequaled and supreme. It relieves all suffering. It is genuine, not illusory. So set forth this mantra of realizing wisdom beyond wisdom. Set forth this mantra that says, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhi, Svaha.